I'm happy to be here. I do have an affection for El Paso. The first time I came here, I was in graduate school, and we came in the middle of the night. And I was from New Jersey, had been in Ohio, been a little bit of time in Atlanta. It was probably my first year in grad school, but I'm not sure. It was my first trip to El Paso. We got here at like 2 a.m., something like that, sleeping in a van. We stayed at UTEP in the dorms, so I think it was summer. And I woke up and looked out the window, and wow, there were mountains. And so, I mean, it would be amazing anytime, but it was amazing to come in the dark of night. I've done that a few times. Sometimes I sneak away in the dark at night, but to wake up and see that. And I've really liked El Paso since I've worked on the missions. I've worked at Fort Bliss, done a number of projects over the years. And I'm going to talk today about Texas. And I know everybody here is not living in Texas or working in Texas, but I think a lot of this hopefully will still be applicable, and I think this will build on many of the principles and ideals that Dan talked about. So I hope that there's takeaways from this, even if the specific examples don't necessarily apply to your situation. My intention really is to show some of the things that are being done, and you can change the storyline to whatever it is, the stories you want to tell, and use some of the same ideas and principles. So quickly about me, we already established I grew up in New Jersey, but I think this is kind of important, not the New Jersey part, but I grew up in a small town. There was a lot of historic things in our town, but there wasn't a history museum or anything like that. Our city hall was historic. Our schools, well, some of the schools were historic that I went to. The churches were historic. And even if you weren't a member of that church, you tended to have concerts or other things, events that would happen in them. The post office was historic, well, until the post office got rid of it. The library was historic. I used to cut through an old cemetery to get home as a shortcut. And so it wasn't going to museums and traveling, and I did that too, and those things are really important. But it was a little bit different situation. The other thing that influenced me is growing up as a Boy Scout. And the town I grew up in had the fortunate history of, for a long period, about 50 years, being the national headquarters, the national training center for Boy Scouts. And what they did actually is bring adult leaders from all over the world to this camp to teach them how to be Boy Scout leaders. And they set them up into patrols just like as if they had been the kids. And each of the patrols created these plaques. The color, the lighting's bad on it, but the upper right, you can see they created patrol plaques, and they had their name often of everybody who was in that. They had their locations they were from. And the other issues were that it was actually a historic estate that had been given to the Boy Scouts. So there were elements of that from the 1920s and 30s. The cabin down at the left is what we met in on a regular basis and what we camped in, and that actually had gone to the New York World's Fair and then come back to be a Boy Scout cabin. It was an exhibit for them. And the other issue is that this was when it was the headquarters for Boy Scouts before they moved to Texas. It was the home of William Bill Hillcourt, who was the author of the Modern Boy Scout Handbook. And so he had a troop at this location, and they were the testing ground for Boy Scouts. So when I was in Scouts and I looked at the handbook, I could see photographs, drawings, stories that were about the very place that I spent a big chunk of my scouting career. The point of this is that I think I became a preservationist not because of going up and down, my parents taking me places, but because I lived in a historic place and I interacted on a daily basis. And so I think it was personal to me. There were ways that I had that personal connection to those that came before me and to that space and the place where whatever it is that I was doing. That's what made me care about it. And that's the kind of connection that we obviously have to have with both our citizens and residents, but also with our visitors to our communities, because that's how they start to care about the things that we care about, and that's how we start to save them, which is the business that I'm in. So at the Texas Historical Commission, we're the state agency for historic preservation. I'm going to talk about us in the sense of some of our programs that directly or indirectly touch on heritage tourism. But our overall mission is to protect and preserve the state's historic and prehistoric resources for the use, education, enjoyment, and economic benefit of present and future generations. And I would argue that kind of for us, every single word in there is very important. The protect is important, but we have to do the other things, and we can't do the other things if we're not doing the protection. And it's the same when you're trying to develop tourism. You can market the heck out of things, and that's an extremely important component, but you have to have the stuff to market. And I would argue most places do have that stuff, but they don't always recognize it. We've got a lot of different disciplines in our agency, about 220 staff, so we're a big agency relative to our counterparts in other locations. I'm going to talk about some of the programs that directly impact. So we have our THC Historic Sites Division. This is outdated, we have 22 state historic sites that we manage for the state of Texas, including the McGoffin home here in El Paso. We last year took over the Spanish mission site in San Augustine, Mission Dolores, so that is now one of our sites that we manage. And then we also, this legislature just turned over the French legation in Austin to us. So we have 22 state historic sites. And I'll also mention we have here in El Paso, we are the owners, thanks to TxDOT actually, of the original Mission Socorro site. The Mission Socorro, you know, today is a later building and a location because it changed and shifted. The original site is just an archaeological site. We know the footprint of the mission. We know quite a bit about that. But because of TxDOT's work on other projects, they acquired that property to protect it and turned it over to our agency. Unofficially, I really think our long-term goals there, beyond just protecting it, is actually hopefully to acquire a little bit more land, give a buffer for it, and then potentially create a visitor experience. So that something that can tie the missions together, and so there's a place that people can go to start that exploration and experience at the missions that's a little bit different than visiting each one individually. But that's a long-term goal that's not funded for us at the moment, but we do have that site to protect it for the future. The goals our program there works on is preserving those resources. That's their number one thing. But then it's followed by getting people to engage, telling the stories, and building partnerships with the community that these sites are in. We also have a museum services program, which actually just provides technical support to 900 history museums across the state. There are 900. They contribute $93 million in operations. That's probably actually a low estimate. So these are small operations, most of these museums, heavily on the backs of volunteers. But this is an important component of how we interpret and understand our state's history. Another program you may not be familiar with that's an honorary program is a Texas Treasure Business Award. And this is a recognition program that the legislature created. And we make this award to businesses that are Texas-owned and have been in operation for 50 years or more in Texas. And they receive this award. Anybody can make the application for a business. There's no application fee or anything like that. And mostly they get a recognition. They get a logo. We hope that they use that in marketing and advertising. We've done 395 businesses thus far, I think. Actually, it's probably a little bit higher than that now. But hopefully over the long term, this is something people will start looking for. Now these businesses range, they're not all travel and tourism. There are funeral homes. I hope you don't need a lawyer or a funeral home while you're traveling, but we have those. But we have lodging facilities, we have restaurants, we have local manufacturing, we have spice companies, things like that, that actually have a lot of opportunities in travel and tourism to talk about what they do, both from a shopping perspective, but to get people engaged in the local community, taking some products home with them, and getting that connection to the community that they're in. So this is long-term something that I think we have the potential to build up more for travel and tourism. So annual preservation activity in Texas, I'm not going to throw too many numbers at you. I could do 3 hours, it was all just numbers, but I don't know that that would help you. But there is a lot of activity. This was the study that Bernie alluded to or mentioned for that University of Texas and Rutgers did for us a couple of years ago. The numbers are a little bit dated, but they're pretty consistent, so I think they would still apply. So you can see the different kinds of activity that's going on in preservation in general, including heritage tourism. And so on an annual basis, they calculated that there's $3.3 billion of preservation activity in the state of Texas that has a big impact. It accounts for 114,000 jobs in the country, billions of dollars added to the GDP, whatever the heck that is, billions of dollars of wages and income that comes in, and state and local tax revenue. Really actually fantastic numbers and really important figures. Texas, similar, a little bit smaller. We don't capture all of that economic activity that happens in the state. Some of it leaks out to other places. In building rehabilitation alone, there's about $10 billion worth of rehabilitation of historic properties going on around the state in this time period. That's a lot. That's really mostly the private sector. The public sector, you can see, is really kind of averaging around $31 million. So most of this is private sector that's going on with the building rehab, both residential and commercial. So those are really big numbers. But another way of looking at a situation in a community is looking at an individual building. And this is a hypothetical. Donovan Ripkema's firm that Dan mentioned did this, and I'll plug at the end, we have a conference coming up, and Donovan Ripkema is one of our speakers. They did this for Iowa, for the Main Street program in Iowa. And so they looked at a typical building that you'd see in a small town, but it would work in a city like El Paso too. 25 feet wide, 100 feet deep, probably 2 stories, a few thousand square feet. Pretty typical building across the state and across the country. That building's sitting there vacant. If it was being utilized for a business or multiple businesses, you'd have rents going to the owner. You'd have property taxes, although that's clearly not Texas. Those numbers would be reversed in Texas for property taxes versus sales tax. Taxes going to the state. Utilities, whether they're public or private. When that building's in use, utilities are being used, money's transferring because of that. When the business is there, they're getting loans from the bank. They have deposits, hopefully in the local bank, but you know. They have suppliers that they're buying things from. They have professional services. Maybe they're advertising. Then they got workers, the business owner and the workers, and you've got wages. The end result in this particular hypothetical example is about $222,000 worth of economic activity if that vacant building, that simple 2-story building that's everywhere, was being actively used. The community would be seeing 200,000 plus in activity. When you add that up across building after building after building, there's a lot of reasons why a building may be vacant, but we have to realize that that's hurting us. And so we have to do things to re-energize that and use those properties, not necessarily to their highest and best use like planners and architects and other people sometimes want to talk about. Modesty works too. Those are big dollars when you add that up. Now I want to talk about our courthouse program. We've been doing this for, getting close to 20 years, I think. This is a program that's a state. It's unique. It's been interested in copying other states. It's been up and down roller coaster. But this is a program where we're paying a lot of the cost for counties to restore their historic county courthouse. Now, obviously in El Paso, you guys lost your historic county courthouse a long time ago. And so this doesn't apply to everybody, but you could apply some of this to other public buildings. It doesn't have to be a courthouse. In this case, we've given out $271 million of state funds to restore these buildings. And we've done lots of projects, but we've done 67 full restorations, bringing those buildings back to their full use while still protecting all the things that are important about them. We've done a lot of emergency stuff as well in smaller projects. There are 139 counties in Texas that have participated in this program. Despite all of that, we still have 75 counties to go. Fortunately, the legislature gave us about $20 million. Won't go real far, but it's money to keep the program going and make some grants in the coming 2 years. But you can see what it's kind of generating. It's being matched a lot locally. That investment is creating jobs. It's creating income and things for the state. Again, numbers that, really hard to personalize. So what else is going on when you're doing a courthouse, when you restore that courthouse or some other public building? The county in this case is leading by example. They're sending a very powerful message that they care about their heritage, they care about their historic buildings, they care about their past investments, and that they're here for the long run. They're investing in this, staying downtown in this historic building and in the and going to continue to be there. And that's a really important message that's conveyed. And again, this is county courthouse, but that message can be conveyed in other kinds of activity, particularly historic activity in our communities. The we'll just say the Knight Foundation, a few years studied this and came up with a term, looked at community attachment. and trying to figure out how do community members emotionally connect with their community. And when they looked at that and they measured in the communities that they had newspapers in what that attachment was, and they found, not really surprisingly, but nobody had looked at it, that when people were attached to that community in the way that they were measuring, the GDP was better in that community. The residents were more likely to stay and not move away, whether that's youth or older, that they were more attached when you had these social offerings and that there were aesthetics. It was the complete picture. It wasn't just having a job, it was all of these other things that made people care about their community. So the social offerings, having places to gather, to interact with each other, openness and welcomeness. You know, if you're an outsider, do you feel like an outsider in that community, or are there ways that you become an insider in that community? The aesthetics, the beauty, those aspects of it. This is a courthouse example, but I think when we're restoring historic buildings, when we're rehabbing them, whether it's a courthouse or something else, this is what we're doing. We're helping to make that attachment. In the courthouses that we've done, a couple of examples. This is Wharton County. This is the building on the right when we started. The building on the left is the restoration back to its original design, and with all of its features that have been lopped off in the 1930s and 40s and changed. But they measured that, and occupancy doubled on the square when that project was done, and the property values increased. It means the property taxes increased, so there's a double-edged sword there. But even there, they might have gone from like 0 to something modest. But it had a big impact just doing that single building there. In Harrison County, Marshall, the judge is adamant that the courthouse was the catalyst for everything else that's kind of happened downtown since that. And again, he talks about the property values increasing, and that developers and folks bumping into each other to try to have the opportunity to work in that downtown and to help revive it. In Denton County, 130, this number would be higher now, 130 revitalization projects took place in downtown Denton after the courthouse got finished. And county officials feel strongly about how that was a trigger for things around it. These spaces have to engage the public and the audience. We've got Franklin County in Mount Vernon on the left using the courthouse square. This, although it's dark, that's kind of the key, is this is Denton County on the right. And you can go to Denton County at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and there will be 40 to 50 people using the courthouse square at night. I've seen poetry reading groups, I've seen study groups, I've seen people playing games, I've seen skateboarders. All at the same time, just people sitting there having ice cream from the ice cream shop across the street. But the county's done things to kind of facilitate that. There's enough activity, they actually get worried about it because from a maintenance standpoint, there's a lot of upkeep they have to have. But that courthouse square isn't just sitting there. It's actually a public space that engages the community and that they use on a nightly basis and on a daily basis. And it's really important. When we create public spaces, you have to actually program them. Certain spaces are so great by themselves that they naturally bring people there. But in so many other cases, you have to activate it on a constant basis so that it becomes part of the community. Part of that's how you handle it, part of it's how you design those situations. But it's really important that these buildings not just be sitting there. We know that courthouses attract visitors. In the case of Denton, they have a museum on the first floor. And a few years ago, they told us that they got 15,000 visitors a year. Not a huge number. But that's a notable number in a town. That's an important number to have. Wharton County, again on the right, they have bus tours, especially early after that building was done. They had buses stopping and people parading through the courthouse to see this building. And we know that that happens all over the state. The couple pictured there, unfortunately I forget their names, but that's a young couple that made it their goal to visit every single county courthouse in Texas, and they did it. And they're not the first ones to do it by any stretch of the imagination, and they're not the last ones. Folks go out and see these buildings. It's an excuse to get out. But the counties don't always realize it. You know, they're the bathroom location, they're their other things, they're the visitor center, but they forget that and they don't always direct people. They don't have exhibits. So we have some plans. We have a program we created that hasn't yet been funded called Destination Courthouse that's intended to engage that community, get the judge, get the chamber, get the citizens, get the history museum, get the businesses all talking about the same thing so that they all realize what impacts they potentially have on community development, but tourism as part of that, and so that there are the connections made. And we look forward to someday actually being able to fulfill that. We've done some pilots. All right, so let's talk more directly about heritage tourism and hit the road. These pictures happen to be my family. My dad's the kid in the upper right, and then you go back a couple more generations. And I think it's just interesting to see how often cars got photographed in these family photographs. They were really proud of their cars at that time, and some because it was really a new thing. Even 1940, I think, in that photograph, that could have been my grandfather's first car. I'm not sure. All right, so heritage tourism. This number is a little bit old, and the governor's office hasn't studied this particular issue to update it, so I'm just going to keep using this one. But the per-party trip, so whether that was 4 people, 5 people, 3 people, the average spending was $770 for a trip in Texas. But if those parties were engaging in visiting historic sites, the average was $1,300. So $561 more from those travelers who engage in our history and our heritage. We know from other studies, 63% of surveyed travelers seek out experiences where the destination, its buildings and surroundings have retained their historic character. We've got to protect what we have, whether it's for our citizens, which is really important, or for the potential visitors. Citizens really have to come first, but both can complement each other. And then folks will pay more. These are leisure travelers, so these aren't people that are automatically predisposed to these activities. These are overall leisure travelers saying, I would pay more to stay in historic lodging. So how do we do in Texas? This is the top 10 activities for travelers in Texas. And this is relative. This is the most recent figures available. Visiting friends and relatives is really high. Shopping, I don't really get shopping, but apparently everybody else does. And I wonder, I don't think it's the Walmarts, because Dan's point is right. You don't travel, in most places, great distances to go to the best Walmart. So it's the local that's driving that. And yeah, traffic from Mexico probably is contributing some to this, but these are statewide numbers. Dining, okay, I get that. Everybody's got to eat. But then, and these are not cherry-picked, this is the order, historic sites, visiting historic sites is 7.6%. Which frankly is a conservative number because of the way they estimate it. It also is a number that pales in comparison to other states. So we can do a better job. And then you can see, I don't understand movies. I can only think of one experience, and it was actually in El Paso, where I was traveling and I saw a movie. But you can see the other activities. So then let's look at the Big Bend region. Now the governor's office, the tourism office uses a different state system than you'll see that my office uses, because it would be too simple if they were the same, but that's life. So this is Big Bend, which actually includes Big Bend, and I think you can see some of that in the numbers, but it includes El Paso. So some things are the same. Visiting friends and relatives is high, a little bit lower, but it's still there. Shopping is high, again, a little bit lower than the statewide numbers. Eating is a little bit lower, but people are still eating. Business pops up that we didn't really see in the other one. Parks, which makes sense because this region has multiple national parks and multiple state parks and is known partly for that aspect and that activity. So it shoots up more than statewide. Medical and doctor I find interesting. I don't know whether it's because of the distance and folks have to stay overnight when they go to a larger community from the rural areas in order to have a procedure or see a doctor. Medical tourism is big, but I'm not really sure why that number shows up so high in your particular region. But then historic sites. So it's lower than it is statewide, which means there's opportunity there. But it's there. It's a high number. It's a high element. And I told somebody yesterday that I thought museums and art was beating out the historic. Nah, they're not. Historic sites are still winning. But they complement each other because folks tend to do both of those. If you look at leisure travelers from overseas, and these are not Canada or US because they're measured coming in on airlines, you can see that international visitors spike. they look at historic locations. That's a big activity for folks coming internationally. But also notice small towns, visiting small towns. So something, not El Paso, but the areas around El Paso and the other regions, something to capitalize on because there's multiple categories. International travelers love what we have to offer in Texas, and they're coming for it. So our agency is charged with developing heritage tourism. And so we're charged with raising the standards of heritage and cultural attractions around the state. We're to foster historic preservation education. We are to encourage regional cooperation and promotion of heritage and cultural attractions, foster local tourism leadership, organizational skills, and assist governments, organizations in preserving what they have, enhancing it, and promoting it as an attraction for the state. The primary vehicle we do this is through our Texas Heritage Trails program, and we're entering our 20th year of this program, and this is based on the travel trails that were created in 1968 for Hemisphere. So the overall travel trails are 50 years next year, and our program is 20 years. These are 10 trail regions. They're independent nonprofits. They have a board and executive director, and they work within the region to promote heritage tourism, but also to develop experiences and opportunities for folks, and to partner, get communities talking about tourism to each other, get them to realize that, yeah, maybe they don't have any hotels, but they've got other things to offer, and that other town has hotels. So you can piggyback on each other and build off of that. So this is a really good opportunity. I know many of you are aware of the Mountain Trail and Wendy Little, who is our executive director, and work with them, but there's always more opportunities there. So that's one way that we do this, trying to promote these sites. We do print products and promotions. We have 3 major travel guides that we do. The center one is a statewide guide that covers the entire state. It replaces individual region guides that we used to have. It's more sustainable for us economically. We also do cultural guides. So we have an African American guide on the left. Now that's not a guide for African Americans. It's looking at our state's history and connections and seeing how our heritage and history is directly connected to African American heritage in the state, and identifying those sites for people to see and experience. Same with Hispanic Texans. And we also offer that in a Spanish language. It is not abridged in any way. It's a full version. We translated the whole thing. And so we have that available. These products, like our others, are available free. You can get them individually. You can order them off our website. You can get them in travel centers. If you want them in your museum, in your location, you can order them by the box load, and we'll ship them to you for free. If you want to use them in a classroom, we'll do that too. We do thematic guides, and I'll just touch on this one. This is a recent release for us, Chisholm Trail. And so 2017 was the 150th anniversary of the Chisholm Trail, so the greatest migration of cattle in the history of the country. Only lasted a few years, but had a dramatic change on the nation as far as what we ate. And the economies of Texas and the country as a whole. So a major, major event. And because we're here and because of the host, I put Tom Lee's Stampede, I think that's the right name for that one, which I believe is in the post office in Stamford? Odessa, all right. We used to be in the post office and they must have moved it. So that is available. I don't have copies with me because I flew, but we can get those to folks. We're also actually on November 11th, we will issue a very similar guide for World War I sites. So the first part of the guide talks about World War I and what its impact was and what our contributions were in Texas. And then the second half gives you sites all over the state where you can go to see and experience and learn about World War I. We have a couple of things coming down the pike that we're just getting started on. The Tom Lee Trail. We're excited about that. It's the first artist-named trail in Texas, and some would argue the country, and I can't disprove that, so we'll go with that. It's going to be a great opportunity, not just for Texas, but for New Mexico and some of the other surrounding areas. Where we're going to take this, I'm not sure. You're going to see where we take in some other things, but this is going to be a little bit different. We are also assigned a Texas Music History Trail. It won't be a trail in a literal sense. It'll be sites all over the state where people can go and experience and understand the history of music and our contribution within the state and nationwide and internationally. So we'll be doing those over the next couple of years. We already have things that we do. We have our Texas Time Travel site, which is an umbrella site with thousands of sites, heritage sites and locations and activities that people can take in Texas. We've created a mobile tour that we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. Our websites, we divide by regions, but we know people travel, so you're able to go relatively seamlessly between those. You can search statewide. We talk about individual sites, we talk about events and activities, we also talk about the communities that host the sites. You can search thematically if you want to find out every heritage site in Texas that we know deals with railroads. You can search for that. You can search for architecture. You can search for different cultural elements to be able to use as a trip planning opportunity. The more recent thing we've really put a lot of time and effort into is our Texas Time Travel Tours, which are mobile tours. They're available as a web application. You can use them. You don't have to be mobile. They work great from your desktop, but they're designed to work on your mobile devices. We have 11 tours that I'll show you in a second that are on there, different thematic tours. And they're not tours, for the most part, in a literal sense if you go from place to place to place. They're an opportunity to give you the stories that you wouldn't get otherwise and entice you to travel. Or if you're out and traveling and you allow it, it will tell you if you're close to something. We wanted to provide interpretation because a lot of the places out there that have really important stories to tell, they're not staffed. People just don't even know the stories. So we wanted you to be able to find the place and hear the story through a different way. We use a lot of video, we use a lot of audio in these. We wanted to have the intangible aspects of heritage. We want to connect the story and the context so you understand why this place that you're visiting or that you want to visit is important in the context of the entire state. Or the region or the location. We use a lot of images, very image heavy, video heavy. That makes them really big files, but we've done some technology things to accommodate that. And we wanted to engage the stakeholders. And with all of these, or virtually all of these, we started with the stakeholders. We brought people together. You tell us what the stories are that we wouldn't recognize as staff, and we'll figure out how we can then tell those. So here's the 11 tours that we have so far. The most recent ones for us are the Texas Forest of Revolution, which only got released a couple of days ago. The Chisholm Trail came out a few months ago. And then the German Texans up there at the top came out about 2 weeks ago. So you can download these, you can use them on the web and not download anything. You can download individual tours, you can delete tours if you feel like you're done with it. And we'll come back to that. I'll show you a little bit more what we did with that. We have a heritage tourism guidebook. It's no longer in print, but you can download it from our website, and it was designed following a lot of the National Trust principles, which I'll highlight in a second, ways that a community or an individual site could start to figure out how to analyze and develop themselves as a heritage tourism destination. Along those lines, we did a pilot project, which we hope to continue again. We worked with a number of communities in the Valley on Hispanic heritage, and we worked in a number of communities along the historic Bankhead Highway. And we spent 6 months working with each community and the stakeholders to try to figure out how they can leverage that particular aspect, whether it was the Bankhead Highway or it was Hispanic heritage, and how they could create new experiences or highlight those experiences that were already there that people just didn't realize or didn't connect to travel and tourism, that visitors would want to see that. Most of us get used to ruts and we know what we've got, we don't think about it, and we don't realize that somebody from outside will find that really interesting, and I'll give you a good example later. So here's the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I would argue is not as active in heritage tourism as they have been sometimes in the past, but they did establish these main principles. Preserve and protect the resources. Again, the number one thing we've got to do. Otherwise, the other stuff doesn't matter. We've got to focus on authenticity, and like Dan, you know, sometimes it's really hard to figure out what the heck that really is. Quality is a little bit easier to figure out. Make the sites come alive with interpretation. Find the fit between community and tourism. Collaborate for sustainability so that we know where we're going. And then there's 4 steps that they lay out, and it's all in this guidebook that you can download for free. Assessing the potential, and we take steps through that. Plan and organize, prepare, protect, and manage, and market for success. And the key is that market for success is number 4 for a reason. That's great. That is extremely important. But you got to get the other stuff before you've got something to market. So I encourage people that haven't to look at this guidebook. Florida has a very similar one. They ripped us off, but that's okay. So you can also get a slightly different version if you go to the Florida websites. They did the same thing. Another program we work with, and it actually has already come up from the table discussions, It's really a federal program, but we collaborate as well. The National Park Service has National Historic Trails, and obviously you have one historic trail, nationalist trail, going through here, the Camino Real. You can see that we don't have a whole lot else going on in Texas. It's kind of a void there. The other ones down here are the other Camino Real, going from Mexico City to Los Adayas, or what used to be Los Adayas in Louisiana. Two really important trails. There are a couple other things coming. There is the Chisholm Trail and the Western Trail that is mostly sitting in DC waiting for the administration to put people in positions that somebody can actually approve it. And unfortunately, there's no signs of that happening anytime in the near future. But at some point, eventually, we'll have those two as national trails. And the Butterfield Trail that also came through the El Paso area is in that process, a little bit further behind, but it's about to catch up and be sitting in DC waiting for that to be approved as well. The routes for the two Camino Reals that we have in Texas, and hopefully you're all familiar with this from here in El Paso, two missions and the Presidio Chapel that are part of the really important sites. I think the politics of UNESCO has been a problem. We haven't actually been funding UNESCO for a couple of decades, but we did have voting rights and participation, and the latest news is, we're going to withdraw from that. So we'll still kind of be there, but we will no longer have voting rights and participate. We won't fund them because we haven't been funding them for decades. I don't know if that's going to impact on the short term or long term the ability of additional designations. I do think it's worth still pursuing. I think it's a really important designation. It is for travel and tourism, for better and worse. There are probably hundreds of thousands of people every year who are traveling, and they're picking their locations specifically to see World Heritage sites. And as you all know, because you probably talked about it with San Antonio, it's a big deal, and it is something, the sites you have are worthy of this. The Camino Real in Mexico, at least in portions, is designated. In the U.S. because of politics, it hasn't been, but that may be able to change. It'll be an uphill fight, but it's worth doing. I'm going to talk about this one as an example for a little bit longer here. And again, some of this can be applied to other kinds of uses, but we have a historic highways program that the legislature mandated for us, and we work with TxDOT on a lot of aspects of this. But we've been surveying historic highways to identify what's there along them. Now, the reason we do this is because of this. This is the typical road condition before the automobile, but at the time the automobile starts to come to towns. This was the transportation network that we had in Texas. And then we got automobiles that started showing up, and this is the situation that they were facing in the 19-teens. You can find a lot of these. Here's another one. Doesn't that look like fun? So what do you think the solution to that was? Well, the immediate solution was this. That is a Texas photograph. It comes from a collection in Colorado, but it actually, I don't know its location, but it is actually a Texas image that we're seeing there. But what that really resulted in, and this simplifies it, but it resulted in highways, which I'll talk about dramatically changing American culture forever. Really monumental moment and shift in our history. So you have the Lincoln Highway 1911, you get some other highways like Pikes Peak, Ocean to Ocean Highway 1912. What you'll notice is they both go through the Rocky Mountains, which means one heck of a time doing that in the winter. Old Spanish Trail 1915, I'm a little fuzzy because we consider the Bankhead Highway the first. Spanish Trail seems like it's a year earlier, but I think maybe it just didn't materialize. But it's a southern route going from San Augustine, Florida to San Diego. And it became an active route. And US 90 today follows much of the old Spanish Trail. The Bankhead Highway, 1916 gets established, and it goes from Washington, D.C. to San Diego. And all these highways were private highways, essentially. Groups were organized to create these highways. They picked the name strategically in many cases. And if you were a town and you wanted that highway to come to your town, well, then you'd better pony up the money. And they did. So the business leaders in town would get together and they'd say, okay, we need this for our transportation network and we want people coming here. travel and tourism hadn't really taken off yet, so it had much to do with other parts of commerce, but that's how it decided where you got to go. And if you might get bypassed, in this case you see a couple of competing routes. There was a northern route and there was a southern route, and they're both actually southern compared to the rest of the country. But they competed with each other. Sometimes one was an unofficial route or an illegal, stealing of the Bankhead Highway or whatever road it was. But you can see going across the country. And so this was the first all-weather transcontinental highway. So you could use this all year round, and it was a really important aspect of highway development. 1916, 1917, we actually get highway departments, and Texas creates their first highway department in 1917, and the federal government starts to get involved. This is a close-up shot. You still can't really read it, but this is the Bankhead Highway as it crosses Texas, and because I'm here in the West, I'll say as it goes from El Paso to Texarkana. Here's the network in 1917, and the green routes are the historic highways that were established at the time the state established its highway system. So we have the Bankhead in green, we have the Old Spanish Trail in blue, we have the Meridian Highway coming down kind of in yellow with a leg that goes off to Galveston. That went all the way to the Canadian border. We have the red route, which is the Del Rio Canadian Highway, which I'm not sure whether they mean Canadian Texas or Canada. It went all the way to Canada and ultimately connected to the Pan American Highway and went through Central America. And all of these pretty much still have U.S. highways or interstate highways today. But these were the first highways that we had. It was the first opportunity for people to travel relatively easily from town to town. And that's important because it starts to actually mean we have leisure travel. Other things have to happen in our society for that to take place, but at this moment in time, we suddenly start to have both leisure time and vehicles and the ability to travel. The travel industry really comes at this very moment. This is the beginning of what we know today as travel and tourism. Other things come out of it that we don't think about. Billboards. There were signs. You look at historic photographs of downtowns and there's signs all over the place, but billboards, they moved them out to the highways. Campgrounds. That was a relatively new phenomena. People were traveling, they needed somewhere to stay, there were not a lot of lodgings, so they camped. They camped by the roadside, but then the property owner might get a little ticked that you were constantly people camping in their front yard. So communities started building campgrounds, either to placate the owners or because they said, there's all these travelers, they need somewhere to stay. If we can get them to spend the night here, maybe they'll spend some money. So the whole idea of camping for recreation comes at this moment in time. And you see it all over the state and all over the country. There's actually a lot of roadside parks. Today we just look at them as picnic benches and things like that. A lot of those were actually created for camping. They were campgrounds first. Now you're probably not allowed to sleep overnight, but a lot of them were actually built for that. Tourist courts. A whole genre of lodging came out of this moment in time. The Bankhead Highway and the others, but specifically the Bankhead Highway. The shot on the left is an El Paso shot. I don't know anything about it, but it is from here in El Paso. The franchise model for motels or anything else comes from this moment in time and from the Bankhead Highway, well, actually Meridian Highway, I'm cheating there. The Alamo Plaza tourist court, tourist apartments, but Alamo Courts, that was a Texas company. Their first one was in Waco. It no longer exists, unfortunately. It's, I'm pretty sure, under the route of I-35 today. But it was the first, and it was the first use of the franchise model. So it comes from Texas, for better and worse, and it comes from this moment in time where we start to have the highways. And they had Alamo Plazas all over the state and all over the country. Why do we do this? Well, we survey to figure out what's there, and that helps be the step towards redevelopment. This particular instance is Big Spring in the Old Settles Hotel. This is a large-scale project, but we see this on the small scale too. A number of things have to happen. It's just not our survey in the Bankhead Highway, but this building had been vacant for decades. But it's now a thriving hotel where you can stay at in historic lodging in Big Spring on the Bankhead Highway. You step out the front door, you're on the historic Bankhead Highway. We find other resources around. We've created a Bankhead Highway brochure that explains a little bit about the history and the importance and the route in Texas. So let's talk about El Paso. There are multiple different maps. These are on our website. All the survey data and information is there for anybody to utilize. But these are the routes of the Bankhead Highway through central El Paso as it crossed the country. And so you're following, I think, roughly what became US 80 on the south end. I think that's mostly Alameda Avenue. And then you turn, depending on the era, you have two different routes. One, I think, is Paisano, going up Paisano Drive, and the other one might be Mesa. So it traversed through El Paso. So we went out looking for what's left, and we found roadway segments, bridges and overpasses. The segment on the left, the surveyors believe needs more more research, but that may be the oldest section of concrete road in Texas. And that's in El Paso, kind of on the north as you leave El Paso proper. And then there's a stretch a little bit further north there as well. So that's dated about 1920. There are other road segments of the Bankhead Highway in Texas. Some of them have been paved multiple times. Others were paved in brick originally, depending on where they were geographically. But this may in fact be the oldest concrete road that survives in Texas, and probably one of the first that would have ever been laid at the time. So we look for stuff like that. That's not very exciting for tourists. We get excited about it. TxDOT might get excited about it. But a traveler, although there are travelers who will go, if they knew that was there, they're going to go look at that road, and they're going to try to drive across it, but they're going to at least walk across it. Go online, you see it, especially Route 66. You know, the bridge is closed. Well, they're still going out on that bridge. You know, gosh darn it, they're walking across it. They just drove 200 miles to get to that bridge. Well, there's other things. You've got gas stations and service stations. Those didn't exist before the Bankhead Highway and the introduction of the automobile. This was a whole new building type, a whole new service industry that comes out of it. And my point of that, this is really, really important stuff actually, but we take it for granted. And these are three that you have here in El Paso that were identified. Everything I'm showing you was determined to be eligible for National Register designation. So they are significant, and they have at least enough integrity to be considered historic. Tourist courts, motels. This is a really strong area for you, and you've got a couple of fantastic examples, although some people in the audience will look at it and go, you got to be kidding me. We've got a tourist court on the bottom left that's relatively traditional. It's actually kind of late 1948 to be building that style. But you've got that. You've got a little more traditional hotels. The Hotel Lake on the bottom would have been a more traditional hotel. The highway didn't exist, but it's on what became the Bankhead Highway. And then the later one was built right on the Bankhead Highway. And that's sort of the old way of building. Then you get the whole idea of motels and motor courts. It didn't exist. There was no such thing until the Bankhead Highway and its sibling highways. This is the greatest. This is fantastic. This you have, it's a tremendous example of the time period architecturally. It is extremely unique for Texas. I mean, you might associate this Pueblo Revival correctly with New Mexico, from the same time period, but we don't have this everywhere else in Texas. You have this, and people will come to see this. They will come to stay there, I promise you. Yes, it may need investment. It needs other activities, but this is an opportunity. Again, maybe you don't care about the Bankhead Highway. That's fine. Find what it is in your history that you care about and apply the same things. That's fantastic. I don't know what the visitor experience is. I don't know what the beds are like. I admit I'm not staying there.
But you go see it.
Yes, and I might go drive by it again and go walk around it. But it's a fantastic example. Cortez Motel. I think this one's having a little bit harder time. But this same thing. Great sign. You don't have as good a signs as some other places on the Bankhead Highway have some fantastic old signs. They didn't find that as much here. This Red Mill Court. I wanted to do 5 slides of Red Court. But you guys would have run me out of town. Go online, and there's some postcards. Go to our site, and you can actually see some postcards. I didn't put it up because I didn't know that I really had the rights to do that. But see what this really was like. It had windmills. They were like, I mean, it's just fantastic. And looking at it from different sides, and I don't know if it's Flophouse. I don't know what it is. But people will travel for that. And the really cool thing about this is that the people that like this stuff, they don't care what condition it's in. They will travel to see this even in its current form. So chambers get upset and they're like, oh, don't show that. We don't want anybody seeing that. But the people who travel these routes, that's what they're looking for. It's the adventure. Finding that, they actually don't want you to tell them where it is. Chicken and egg kind of thing. You got to tell them where it is to get them to come there, but they really want to find it on their own because then it's cool and it's secret. We haven't figured out the trick for that. But this is a fantastic opportunity, and that we've got tax credits. If the owner's in the room, I'll talk to you, I'll go visit, we'll send people out, we'll do whatever we can to try to get some investment in there so that that's where people can come and stay. And that's a relatively small project, but you do one of those, and then the next building gets done next door or across the street, and then there's two of them, and then the buzz starts. And it really does happen that way. I'm not making it up. Others. Again, we're talking Pueblo revival style. You're not going to find that elsewhere in Texas. Okay, there's a couple of examples out there, including Indian Lodge, state property. But for the most part, that's really unique. People will travel for that. You got auto dealerships. You didn't have cars, so you didn't have anybody selling them. But you have a whole genre of buildings that comes up in this time period. And these are the examples that are all historic that you have here in El Paso. Now, I don't think any of them are auto dealerships anymore, and they don't need to go back to being auto dealerships. They can be something else. But this is an opportunity to take advantage of. Restaurants. You didn't have leisure travel. Yeah, there were restaurants, there were railroad restaurants, there were other things, but most people didn't eat out. Now all of a sudden you're traveling great distances. If you weren't camping, or even if you were camping, suddenly you had to eat. So restaurants really a lot of that comes out of the highway development. Those are three you've got. These are examples, not El Paso, just to show you. At the time we surveyed in Weatherford a few years back, that was the gas service station. And I bet everybody in Weatherford didn't care one little bit about that building. But somebody did. He bought it, turned it into a restaurant, turned it into a car museum. The shot on the bottom. The cars were actually better than the food, but maybe they've taken care of that. But that was very successful and became a buzz, and people were coming just to go to that car museum and eat at that restaurant. That he then bought the building across the street on the next block, and you see it on the bottom, and then what he did on the top. And architecturally, there's a few things I would take exception to, but he expanded his car museum, and it is really cool. There's a lot of great cars, and I'm not a car person. But so now this is a destination that people are going to in downtown Weatherford. And you'll see Weatherford does other things to leverage that. This is Mount Vernon. This is just a typical commercial building. It didn't happen all because of the Bankhead Highway, but we worked with Mount Vernon on that in a lot of different ways. And now their buildings are being redone, and they're really playing up the Bankhead Highway. We work with other communities. These are just examples when we're trying to show a community that the structure that they see as an eyesore can really be an asset. And things like service stations that had a whole bunch of pavement that isn't necessarily the most pleasant place to be, there's ways that you could mitigate that. Still be able to kind of convey that aspect of it, but make it more pleasant for people to be in when they're not sitting in a car. We do this online with the Bankhead Highway, so you can go to our website and you can search Bankhead Highway, and Route 66 had its own song. You get your kicks on Route 66. Or I got my kicks on Route 66. So when we were working on the Bankhead Highway and emphasizing that, father-son team decided that the Bankhead Highway needed its own song, and so they created one, wrote it. You can listen to it on our website. It's really kind of cool, but you can decide whether you like the song or not. It's up to you. So with the mobile tour that I talked about, we did one for the Bankhead Highway, and this is one of the things that people might actually go across the entire route. Most of our tours, people are going to see a site. It's going to be more random, but on the Bankhead Highway, it's linear, so they actually will go from one end to the other. So you can learn about the context, you can watch videos, you can listen to audio, you can tour it by city, you can tour it in other ways. We talk about the things that were important, some of which we've already touched on, about the travel and tourism and the roadside, and the Good Roads movement actually came from bikes. We have roads because the cyclists said we need better roads. Then we had cars, and it really took off, but it's actually cyclists that started the Good Roads movement. When you're using our mobile tour, especially on a mobile device, this is what you can get. You can get, it's now even crazier than this because we've added 4 or 5 tours since this photo was shot. But it maps everything out for you. If you turn location services on and let us spy on you, which I promise we don't actually do, it will tell you if you're close to something. So if you're following the Bankhead Highway and you're close to an African American site or any of the other themes that we have, it'll pop up and tell you that you're close to something in case you want to go visit it. So it's an opportunity to grab people for one theme and get them interested in different ways. We have pages on the app for individual sites. We try to point out all the things that you can go see and experience that are related to the highway. And then we work with the communities to try to figure out what their story is. The Bankhead Highway went across the country, so you could argue it's not unique, but it actually is. And there are different stories in every community about that highway, what it did, who was involved. And so the trick is helping them tell those things and getting experiences. You can go online and you can listen to some interviews that we did with the 3 communities that we used as pilots, and they'll explain what they did to leverage the Bankhead Highway and bring travelers in and raise awareness locally, which was actually a big part of it. In Big Spring, they created Summers on the Green, down on the green space that's immediately adjacent to the old Settles Hotel that had been restored. They started a local film series. They started by showing cars because it's the most appropriate movie for the Bankhead Highway and for preservation. But they did children's activities where they got to decorate their own little car and then they sat and watched the movie in it. They did some costume contests. And they've actually continued this. They showed multiple movies, 3 to 5 in the first year, and I think they continued it this year as well in the summer. In Weatherford, they revived an old festival, which was really a market days they used to have called Stray Days. I still don't know what the name is from, but they did this. They got the local theater group to do vignettes that talk about the history of the Bankhead Highway, and actually were really quite funny. They had antique cars come and be downtown. They did speakeasy events so that you could go to local locations and sort of recreate a speakeasy. Did have alcohol, so they got that part right. I went to the first one 2 years ago, and I spent quite a few hours there. Again, I'm not a car person, but it was fascinating. They said they had 5,000 people. They weren't all there when I was there, but I'll take them at their word. And they did this again this year a couple of weeks ago. In Mount Vernon, they created or rebranded a film festival that they were working on for independent films, and they branded it around the Bankhead Highway. And then they did like a fun run. And the Bankhead Highway is named after Senator Bankhead from Alabama, which is also why the route went through Alabama. Chicken and egg, which came first? Senator Bankhead had a niece, I don't think it was a daughter, I think it was a niece, Tallulah Bankhead, who was a movie star of the silver screen. And so they do a fun run, and you come dressed up as Tallulah Bankhead, and you run the 4K or whatever it is in your high heels. In all of the cities we worked in, they all did a version of this. They took historic photographs that we helped them identify, tell the stories, and created in a really simple way something to engage visitors. So in some cases, they put these in really large size. They put them, if they had a vacant building, they filled up the storefront window with this. Other times they were smaller. Sometimes they were contests to try to get you to look at something that you might not have otherwise looked at or find the next thing in town. Some of them were contests and you had to go into one of the businesses to get the answer to the contest. So this was really successful, and it helped, in a way, spruce up and bring attention to some of the buildings. And in fact, actually, this building, you can see the panel that was done for it, and I don't think it's because of the panel, but I'll take credit for it, but somebody has bought that building and is rehabbing it for use, and that community says, we're on the Bankhead Highway, and we're going to brand that way, we're going to tell people about it. Other things happened along the Bankhead Highway. A military convoy came through to recreate a convoy that took place very early on in the Bankhead's history. That garnered, we did everything in the world to tell everybody about the Bankhead Highway. That did far more than we could ever do on social media and going viral and everything else. Get some military vehicles going town to town and stopping and having barbecues in towns, throwing parades. Far more attention than we could ever do. There was a Sisters on the Fly group that came through, and this was about 50 women who travel every summer for a few weeks, and they all have trailers that they decorate, and they stop in town after town after town to travel, and they chose to travel the Bankhead Highway. There are antique car groups that are doing this, not always the whole highway, but sections of the highway, very popular. We had other towns jump on the bandwagon, Ranger that we weren't, and Garland that we weren't working directly with, Grand Prairie, Aledo. These other cities heard what we were doing, got a little bit of advice from us, and they started to take off on the same thing. We did a film contest ourselves. that was an interesting experiment. It didn't really work out maybe the way we'd hoped. It was hard to get people to understand. We didn't do enough for them to understand what the Bankhead Highway was, unfortunately, to translate into the things that we wanted. But it was a cool experiment to try. Other places, these are Route 66 examples, but just to convey, you can do this. Small communities can do it, big communities can do it. Route 66 is big business. Really, really has a cachet the Bankhead won't have for years, but the opportunity is there. And it can be something other than the highway. That's fine too. But find out what your story is, make it a real story, but then leverage it. Route 66 again, I don't know if that's Pontiac, where they have both Route 66 and the Lincoln Highway. Greedy town that they are. So lots of opportunity there to play that up. Make sure if you're doing it, it's not just superficial things. Give people a chance to understand, whether they're a citizen or they're a visitor, what it is that we're telling them about. So different ways of interpreting it, both live and where it's more static. Then have fun with it. If you're going to go that route, play it up. This is, again, mostly Pontiac, Illinois. They have done everything they can to leverage Route 66. They have now all kinds of art galleries. They've got all kinds of things. It's worked really well for them. I think so far the community actually is behind that, so they've balanced the visitors with the folks that are living there. This is an example in Arlington. Because of all the work we were trying to do there to help them understand the Bankhead Highway, this was a relatively nondescript, but this was a long-standing family restaurant on the Bankhead. Yeah, Arlington, Texas. And so it changed hands, and the new owners decorated the building. Not how I would decorate a historic building, but I'll give them. They said, "All right, we're gonna go with the Bankhead. We like this idea. It's going to make us different, and heck, it's going to make our street different than the commercial street a few blocks away." In Austin, gas stations, you can liven them up. They become places to be. We're just about done, Bernie. This one I do want to tell you. This is the Blue Swallow Motel in Tucumcari, New Mexico. This is, I tell you this story for a couple of reasons. One is that this motel was bought a few years back by a husband and wife who were traveling Route 66, thinking about making a change in their life. Well, when they get home, they had a hotel that they owned. So they bought this hotel. They bought it from the original owner. I think she was in her 90s. And they have made it the place to stay, or one of the places to stay. If you travel Route 66 with a purpose, you darn well stay at the Blue Swallow. If you're from Germany or other places in Europe where Route 66 is something people come here to see in large numbers, that travel agent, because they still use travel agents in Europe, will book you at the Blue Swallow Motel. Otherwise, you're going to find a new travel agent. So it's not very big, but they have done everything they can, and it was relatively organic. So if you're on a bus trip and it doesn't work out that you're staying there, they actually have it so the bus will pull up, you get a boxed lunch from the local bakery, sandwich shop, whatever it is, and you sit in front, you sit in the old chairs in front of the different hotel rooms to take your break in the bus, and they let you see the rooms. They actually let you see the rooms before you plunk your money down if you're staying there at night. But their guests are wildly loyal. So here's what they do. They started a tradition of doing s'mores. Well, we all know s'mores. What's the big deal? Well, in Europe, they didn't have s'mores. That's new, that's novel. In Asia, it's new, it's novel. So the international visitors particularly come, and they sit outside at night, and they cook s'mores because the hotel gives them everything they need for the s'mores, including the fire pit. And that is a unique experience. They bond with each other, they bond with the place, and they want to come back. Over s'mores. Just give me the chocolate bar, I'll be happy. But that's an opportunity, and it's so crazy because they had guests from Texas who said, "You need a bigger fire pit." They went back to Texas. They were in the DFW area somewhere. And a few months later, a truck shows up at the hotel, and there's a fire pit shaped like Texas. And they got a fire pit. A few years later, the same people said, "That's not big enough for you." So they sent another fire pit that was like twice the size, also shaped like Texas. So another guest found, I think they were reproduction, but found bed linens She sent bed linens to the hotel for every single guest room. Not because she thought the bed linens were bad, that might be the wrong part of the story, but because they were time period appropriate. And she cared so much about this hotel and the owners that she did this, just like the fire pit. The hotel owners didn't buy this, but they're getting loyalty. It's the place to go. There are other great motels, and some of them are also being redone in Tucumcari. But if you're traveling Route 66, they want to go there. That's why I show those other photographs here in El Paso or wherever it is when I give a different talk about this. You can do that. That can happen here or anywhere. You can make that experience for the visitors. And I should really just end there. But ways you can get involved, there's social media groups for Texas Bankhead Highway and attempts to have a national Bankhead Highway. There's actually an attempt to create a new Bankhead Highway Association to market the highway and develop it as a tourist attraction throughout its entire length. We can mark the highway. If you're not on TxDOT right away, you can actually do these signs. They don't meet TxDOT standards, particularly the Blaze, the BH, that TxDOT, for somewhat understandable reasons, will not allow us to use. But if you're not on TxDOT right away, you can get these signs made pretty cheaply, and you can mark the highway, and cities and counties are doing that. If you're on a TxDOT right away, it's a more elaborate process. My staff doesn't run it, so I can't completely fix that. But there is a process for getting signs like this to mark the route of the Bankhead Highway. So you can do it on TxDOT right away. It's just a little bit more trickier for understandable reasons. And so that's my sign to stop. That is an old stop sign. You find them in a few towns. This one's in Eastland, Texas, on the Bankhead Highway. That is the Bankhead Highway, the brick there. But I've seen them in South Texas. I can't imagine how they told people to stop. There used to be little reflector kind of eyeball things on the top of that kind of glowed when headlight hit it or light hit it. And the last slide is a shameless plug. We have a Real Places conference that we're doing in January. It'll be in Austin this year. We did one a year and a half ago in 2016, got rave reviews. That one was focused exclusively on heritage travel. This one is going to be broader, but heritage travel is a really important component of it. Again, Donovan Ripkema, who Dan plugged, is going to be a speaker and involved in at least 2 of our sessions. The registration site just went live yesterday. I think the schedule and the details are still lagging behind, but probably by Monday they should be up as well if they're not today. So I'd encourage you, travel. Well, you can't take the Bankhead Highway and get to Austin. Take the Bankhead Highway part of the way, then switch to the old San Antonio, Old Spanish Trail, and then get on the Meridian Highway and come up to Austin from the south or down from the north. And really at least look at that. I appreciate your time. I love El Paso. I love the surrounding area. Even if you're not from Texas and you want to take my card, you want to call me, talk to me, we'll do whatever we can to help regardless. Borders are borders. But communities like this are much bigger than the borders. So thank you.